Shalom from Jerusalem and welcome to this program, Messiah in the Torah. Yeshua, Jesus said that Moses wrote about me, and that's what we're going to look at once again now from the law of Moses, the Torah of Moses. This week's Torah portion is called VaYetze, which means, and he went out. And we will begin to read from the beginning in Genesis chapter 28 from verse 10. And I pray that you are going to see some wonderful things here from the Torah of Moses about the Messiah in this program. It says, Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. We can stop there, and I'm going to say some things about this exciting, well-known story, one of the most well-known stories of the Bible, the dream that Jacob had of the ladder. Now, we read here that this is happening as Jacob is leaving the promised land to go to his ancestors in the land of Mesopotamia in order to find a wife. And we have mentioned earlier here in this series that Abraham's sojourn into Egypt is a picture of the Jewish people's time that they spent in Egypt when they were enslaved there and then returned to the land. Now, when Jacob is leaving the land, he is going to be away for 20 years with his uncle Laban. And this is a picture of the Jewish people's dispersion from the promised land that has lasted now for almost 2,000 years. That is 20 centuries. And we can see some exciting parallels about this time that Jacob spent with Laban away from the promised land, and how the Jewish people have been living outside of the promised land now for 20 centuries and then returning. It says here that when Jacob left, it says here in verse 11 that the sun had set. So the setting of the sun is a picture of the time of darkness, when there's going to be a difficult time for the Jewish people. And also it has to do with a spiritual decline, that is going to take place now because of the dispersion of the Jewish people. When Jacob is returning to the land again, which we're going to talk about next week, we read that the sun rose above him. So this is a picture of the very opposite. There is a spiritual restoration taking place at the end of the time of exile for the Jewish people. And that's the time we're living in right now. More about that later. But here we see that it says in the beginning of verse 11 that Jacob came to a certain place. It is translated here in the ESV translation. Literally it just says he came to the place. This is an expression that we found also when Abraham went in obedience to God to sacrifice his son Isaac. He came to the place. He saw the place. So it is a reference in the scriptures about the house of God and the temple and the presence of God. So he came to a certain place. Actually, in the Hebrew, it says that he encountered the place. And that word encountered is a word that is also used about prayer. So this, to summarize all of it here, Jacob is having an encounter with God as he's leaving the land of promise. This we can see prophetically that just before he has not left the promised land yet when this story takes place. He's still in the promised land, but he's about to leave the promised land. And just before the Jewish people's long exile began 2,000 years ago, they also had an encounter with God in the form of the Son of God appearing among them, the Messiah, Yeshua, born of the Virgin, who came and dwelt among his people. So that was an encounter that they had. And we can see a very powerful parallel here between the encounter Jacob had and the encounter that his ancestors, or his descendants, I should say, had when the Yeshua, Jesus, came the first time. Let's read on in the text here. I will continue from verse 11 again. And he came, or he encountered the place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. So darkness is now about to begin. It has to do with spiritual decline and the beginning of suffering for the Jewish people. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. So here it's talking about a special stone. And we're going to see later on in the text, this stone is a picture of the Messiah, because it is the first object that we read about in the Bible that is being anointed. And of course, Messiah means the anointed one. So this stone is a picture of the Messiah. And it's also says that we can go to, or jump ahead in the story here to verse 22, the last verse in chapter 28 here. Jacob is promising God after this revelation, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar, and which he had anointed, we see earlier in the text, it shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give it full tenth to you. So this stone is going to become God's house. And we know that the Messiah is likened to the house of God. He is the temple of God. We're coming back to that in a moment. But first I want to point out something of a mistranslation here that we also have, I think, most of us understood wrongly here from the text. It says that here that Jacob put this stone under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. That has always been strange to me when I grew up, how Jacob could use a stone for a pillow. But it's a mistranslation. Jacob did not use the stone under his head. he used the stone beside his head. Shepherds in those days, when they were out in the open, they put stones around their head as a protection against serpents and scorpions. And it literally says that he took, in the Hebrew it says that he took one of the stones around him and placed them around him. So it was especially one of the stones that he had around him that is a picture then of the Messiah. Of course, this is a picture of the Messiah being our salvation, our deliverance from all evil, the protection against all the attacks of the enemy, how he has saved us out from the power of the kingdom of darkness. So this is the stone that Jacob placed not under his head, but by his head as a protection. And then he dreams, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and on top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And then it says in verse 13, and behold, the Lord stood beside him. Actually, it can also be translated. He stood above this, and beside Jacob here, beside this ladder, and began to speak to Jacob. Now, I want us to go to John Gospel, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, and we're going to read a reference to this story here that is very interesting. The Gospel of John, chapter 1, and this is in the encounter that Nathanael had with the Messiah. And so let's read here how Philip, it says in verse 45, one of the disciples found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law," that is in the Torah, "and also the prophets wrote, Yeshua of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said of him, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" Yeshua answered him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Let me just comment briefly on that. As Christians, we know Jesus, Yeshua, as the Son of God, but most Christians do not realize he's also a Jewish rabbi, a Jewish Torah teacher, and he is the King of Israel. We need to learn to know him for who he truly is. And he is the one, just like Philip said, that Moses wrote about in the Torah. Now let's read on here in the text. Verse 50, Yeshua answered him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." So here we see that Yeshua is directly referring to the dream that Jacob had in Bethel, and he's referring it to himself, that the revelation of the angels ascending and descending is something that is referring to heaven testifying that he is the Messiah. He is the Son of God. He is that stone, that anointed stone that we're going to read about here now in the text in Genesis 28. Let's continue in, first of all, I want us to point out and see something here in verse 16. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." Just like God revealed himself to his people through the Messiah 2,000 years ago, most of the descendants of Jacob did not know who he was. It was a complete surprise to them, and to most of them it is still not something that they have realized. In Jacob's, this is a prophecy of exactly what would happen when Jesus, Yeshua, came the first time. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." Of course, Yeshua Jesus, he is the way to the Father. He is the gate to heaven. It is through him that we can access God. He is the mediator between God and man. And this is the encounter that Jacob had here in the dream. Verse 18, so early in the morning, Jacob took the stone. Here we have it again, the stone, referring to Messiah. Took the stone that he had put by his head, that should be, not under his head, and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. He anointed the stone with oil. So this, once again, this is the first item in Scripture that we see being anointed. So it is referring, the stone is a picture of the Messiah. And he called the name of that place Bethel, which means the house of God. But the name of the city was Luz as at the first. And then, of course, Jacob makes a vow, and he's saying that if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set up for a pillar, shall be God's house. It is a prophecy about what will happen when the Jewish people return again after 20 centuries, after 2,000 years. And we're just on the threshold to this. The stone that was rejected has become a cornerstone. This is the foundation for the presence of God, the house of God that is going to be revealed again here in the land of Israel to the Jewish people. Let's look again, before we go on here, also at the promises, the awesome promises that God is giving to Jacob here as he is having this dream. God is telling him, let's read from verse 13, and behold, the Lord stood above it, or beside him, and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. This is so important that the promise of the land was first given to Abraham, then it is repeated to Isaac in chapter 26, and now it is being repeated to Jacob. It was not repeated to Ishmael, but to Isaac, and it's not being given to Esau, but to Jacob. It is the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob who are the inheritors to the promise of the land. And I want us to see some scriptures about this in the apostolic writings. Let us go first to Acts chapter 3, where Peter is preaching in the temple. And he is saying there, because I'm emphasizing this because some theologians say that the promise was given to Isaac and they are fulfilled in the Messiah, and that's it. No, the promises were given, yes, through Isaac, but also repeated to Jacob and his offspring. And this is what Peter is also emphasizing here in Acts chapter 3. We can read from verse 22. Moses said, the Lord God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brothers. You shall listen to him in whatever he tells you. Let me just emphasize here that Peter is speaking to Jews gathered in the temple to pray. There are no Gentiles in the audience here. Verse 23, and it shall be that every soul who does not listen to that prophet shall be destroyed from the people. And all the prophets who have spoken from Samuel and those who came after him also proclaimed these days. And listen now what Peter is saying. You are the sons of the prophets and of the covenant that God made with your fathers, saying to Abraham, and in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. God, having raised up his servant, sent him to you first to bless you by turning every one of you from your wickedness. So we see after here the death and resurrection of Yeshua, Peter emphasizes that the Jewish people are still the heirs to God's promises to Abraham and his seed. Also, let's look at Romans chapter 15 and verse 8. Romans 15 and verse 8, where Paul is saying, for I tell you that Messiah became a servant to the circumcised to show God's truthfulness or faithfulness in order to confirm the promises given to the patriarchs. So all of God's promises, including the ones given to the Jewish people, they are yes and amen in Messiah and through Messiah, because he was sent to confirm the promises given to the patriarchs, not to take them away from the patriarchs and their descendants, but to confirm them, not to give them to another people called the church. That's called replacement theology. Let's go back now to the text here in Genesis 28. The end of verse 13. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. What a powerful moment this must have been for Jacob to hear God himself confirming the promises to him that Jacob had longed for so much, even though he is now leaving the promised land. He is going to be away from it for 20 years. God is reassuring him that the promises are for him. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring, this is Jacob's offspring now, the Jewish people, Israel, into you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. How awesome this is. These promises are still waiting to be fulfilled. That God is going to give the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Jewish people, the promised land. And God will be with them, bringing them back to the land. Incidentally, this promise is given just a kilometer or so from Ramallah, the very seat of the Palestinian Authority, where they have as a goal to take the promises away from the Jewish people and destroy the Jewish people from the land. Well, God is going to fulfill the promises to his people. We can be sure of that. His honor is at stake here. So, and his word will never fail. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall never pass away. The descendants of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob will inherit the promised land. And of course, the key to this is going to be the recognition of the Messiah as the house of God, as the dwelling place of God, and as the revelation of God, when they are going to welcome him and say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So here we see this revelation now of the angels of God that meets Jacob as he's leaving the land. And I just want to also mention that when Jacob is returning, the angels of God are once again appearing to Jacob. There is something with the promised land connected with the angels of God. The late Bible teacher Derek Prince, he told a story about a pastor in New Zealand, I believe, who had a dream in 1967 where he saw the angels in heaven ready to be released on the earth, and they were very eager to go down on the earth. And just a few days later, he had the same dream again, but this time he saw that they were released on the earth, and it was a very powerful dream. So he began to tell his colleagues that, I believe there's going to be a powerful revival soon. But months and years passed, and nothing happened. So finally, he thought that maybe I should check to see what date it was that I saw the angels being released on to the earth, to see if something happened somewhere else on the earth on that day. And sure enough, he found it was the first day of the Six-Day War in 1967, where the Jewish people regained the territory where we see the story taking place here in Genesis, where Jacob had his dream. They got all of Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, the Golan Heights, and all of Sinai. And this is something that was accompanied by angels being released to the earth. And we can be sure that God is going to keep His promises to the Jewish people. And they are going to have another encounter with the Messiah when He returns. And He is going to become, for them, the cornerstone, the chief cornerstone that will be welcomed by the shouts of "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So we see once again how Moses wrote about the Messiah. Everything is prophesying about Him and pointing towards Him. I just had the opportunity now to speak on the very first portion of this Torah portion for this week. You can find more teaching about this from our weekly Torah that you can subscribe to from our website, thewatchman.org, and go to weekly Torah, and you can get more of revelation from this portion that we have just studied. God bless you, and shalom from Jerusalem.